2775 Glass Hell. The gargantuan beasts pulled the armored wagons across Godgrave, traveling with daunting speed. Here on the Road of Shadows, the caravan could allow itself to move quite fast without compromising its safety. Once they reached the Glass Hell, however, they would have to slow down to avoid being ambushed by nightmare creatures. Not that no nightmare creature attacked the wagons before they left Godgrave. Rain had proven her worth in these few fierce skirmishes. Being able to see in the dark, she could usually notice the enemy from a great distance. Then, it was just a matter of drawing her bow, taking aim, and sinking a luminous arrow into their hide. Illuminated by a blinding radiance in the depths of darkness, the nightmare creatures were revealed to the entire caravan long before they could launch an attack. So, dealing with them became much easier. Spared from having to spill their blood by Rain's arrows, the guards swiftly grew fond of her. Just a few days later, she was everyone's favorite person, well, except for the seasoned awakened warrior who had spoken about the Dreamspawn. Rain kept a distance from him, and he seemed indifferent toward her, as well. The man had not spoken about Astarion since that first time. The rest of the guards, however, still teased him about it from time to time. They did not treat the name of the supposed supreme with any kind of reverence, and seemed amused by the idea instead. It was to the point that an imaginary sovereign by the name of Astarion became a running joke among the guards stationed on the head wagon, and as they were rotated to safer sections of the caravan, that joke spread to its very tail as well. Rain did not like hearing that joke at all. Soon enough, they reached the end of the Road of Shadows and crossed to the humerus of the Titanic skeleton. As they descended from the height of Godgrave and reached the bridge connecting the humerus to the radius, a beautiful vista of the Glass Hell revealed itself far below them. The Glass Hell looked quite like the name suggested. It was a vast plain made entirely out of glass. There were tall ridges and deep crevasses scattered across its polished surface here and there, but by and large, this region of the dream realm was flat and smooth, ignited by the sunlight that reflected from the surface of the glass like a river of molten gold. The transparent glass reminded one of ice and vast glaciers, summoning memories of winter and refreshing cold. But actually, the Glass Hell was like a sweltering oven. That was because the glass absorbed the heat of the sun throughout the day, then radiated it outward during the night. Worse than that, there were countless focus points scattered across the plane, acting as lenses. If one was not careful, they could be burned to death by focused sunlight, blinded by its radiance, or simply suffocated by the heat. However, that was not why this region of the dream realm was called the Glass Hell. The real reason lay beneath the surface of the glass, in the transparent depths of the region. There, myriad tunnels could be seen stretching far into the darkness. And sometimes, one could just barely discern the shapes of transparent creatures scurrying along those tunnels like glass ghosts. That was because this entire region of the dream realm was one enormous hive, populated by a great swarm of peculiar nightmare creatures. The abominations were insect-like in nature and possessed transparent bodies that made them difficult to detect. Their scythes and mandibles, however, were as sharp as razors. Worse than that, they moved underground and could burst from the glass anywhere on the plane, either in small hunting groups that dragged unfortunate prey into the depths of the hive, or as great hordes that poured onto the surface and devoured everything in their path. Needless to say, surviving in the Glass Hell was not an easy task. Humanity still conquered it, though, or at least its surface. The jagged black wall of the Hollow Mountains rose from the ground far in the north, while the sole citadel in the region was located closer to its southern boundary. That citadel was called the Red Hill, and that was where the merchant caravan was headed. Taking off his helmet, Pil smiled and raised his head to bask in the sunlight. Despite the dangerous nature of the region, the caravan guards were still happy to escape Godgrave, where the very sky was a deadly threat. "Isn't it nice to see the sun, Ronnie?" He looked at Rain and chuckled. "Cherish the feeling. You'll be missing the Road of Shadows once we reach the plain and feel the heat." Rain simply pointed to a piece of polished volcanic glass hanging on a leather cord around her neck, the memory that her brother had creatively called the pièce de résistance. "This charm keeps me cool. How else do you think I survived in Godgrave?" Pil gave the charm an envious look and mumbled in a wistful tone. "I should get myself one of those." Not all awakened had vast arsenals of memories, in fact, most only had a few. A charm like that was a real luxury. The caravan crossed the bridge and descended toward the Glass Hell. As they did, the temperature of the air grew steadily until Rain found herself feeding the pièce de résistance a bit of essence to keep herself from sweating. Pil wasn't that fortunate. Hiding in the shadow of the battlement, he looked up at Rain and forced out a smile. All around them, the glass hell was shining like an ocean of molten gold. It's noon. The heat is at its worst at noon. Things will be better once the sun moves on. A little better, at least. Angles and reflections, or some such. Rain nodded, looking over the glowing plain somberly. All around her, the guards were pulling makeshift goggles from their armor and putting them on. Some looked like pieces of WOD with narrow horizontal slits, others looked like pinhole glasses, things that one would use to protect their eyes from snow blindness, more or less. Ah, yes, Pill put on a pair of goggles, as well. You should wear something to protect your eyes from the glare, Ronnie. Otherwise, you'll go blind. I'm sure somebody has a spare pair. I can ask around. Rain smiled. No need. She summoned the bag of withholding and pulled a pair of fashionable luxury brand sunglasses out of it. Putting them on, she grinned. Always come prepared, you know. The sunglasses were actually a prank among the members of the Shadow Clan, who at some point had developed a habit of gifting each other absolutely useless items when meeting each other on the Forgotten Shore. Sunglasses and sunscreen were the most popular gifts, and Rain had half a dozen pairs by now. This particular one had been gifted to her by Tamar. Pill chuckled. I see you're doing well for yourself, Ronnie. I'm glad. She did not respond, though. Instead, she turned and stared into the ocean of molten gold intently, then swiftly pulled an arrow out of her quiver and knocked it on the string of her bow. 2776 Red Hill. Far away, almost invisible, an eerie creature was hiding in the golden glow. Rain had almost not noticed it, but a subtle movement betrayed its presence. The ethereal creature was about 3 meters in length, almost entirely transparent, and vaguely resembled an enormous woodlouse made of glass. As if sensing that it had been noticed, the abomination launched itself forward with stunning speed. Its 14 long legs bit into the glass, pushing the ghostly body forward. The wind carried over a melodic sound of the segments of its clear carapace scraping against each other, as if crystal chimes were ringing quietly in the breeze. Suffused with a golden glow, the nightmare creature was almost invisible on the glistening plane of glass. Rain's arrow still found it, though. It struck the joint of one of its legs, severing it cleanly. A split second later, the second arrow struck, and then another, and another. Some took a limb, while some took a couple. In the span of half a dozen seconds, all 14 legs of the abomination were shattered or severed, leaving it writhing on the ground. Rain lowered her bow, breathing heavily, and spared a crippled creature a cold look. She might not have been able to kill her enemies, but that did not mean that she could not maim them. Or mangle and torture them, for that matter, if need be. Pill jumped to his feet and looked at the disarmed, dislegged abomination. Then, he turned to Rain in astonishment. That was some fine archery, Ronnie. A confused frown creased his brow, and he raised an eyebrow. But if you are that good with a bow, wouldn't it have been easier to just kill it? Rain remained silent for a few moments, catching her breath, and then looked at him with a smile. Target practice, Pill. I might be good with a bow, but I can always get better, right? He scoffed. So young, so ambitious. Shaking his head, the older man looked back at the crippled abomination. I should probably finish it off, then. Only, it's quite far away. I don't think I can hit it. Perhaps you should do the honors, since it's your kill anyway. Rain kept smiling while trying to come up with a reason not to. At that moment, a familiar voice sighed in her ear. There's no need. She frowned slightly and looked at the writhing abomination. Is he going to? In the next moment, something plummeted from the sky and pierced the nightmare creature. No, it didn't just pierce it. The force of the impact was terrible enough to simply splatter it across the glass, turning the massive creature into a vast puddle of transparent slime and glass-like shards. All that remained was an enormous arrow, several meters in length, rising from the shattered surface of the glass plane at an angle. Rain stared at it incredulously. What kind of sniper ballista? Her brother sighed again. It's that guy. That bastard is showing off. Pill scratched the back of his head. Not. Rain studied him for a moment and pointed to the giant arrow, which was already collapsing into a whirlwind of sparks. Hey, Pill, what the hell was what? He let out a nervous laugh. Oh, it's the Lord of Hell, the saint who rules Red Hill. He probably shot that arrow all the way from the citadel. Rain looked at him with an unamused expression. That citadel is like 1,000 kilometers away. Pill coughed awkwardly. Well, you know how saints are. What, do you expect their powers to be reasonable? Shaking his head, he walked away. Left alone, Rain glanced at her bow. which had felt mighty just a minute ago, and sighed. Then, she made her shadow sign a question. A friend of yours? Her brother scoffed. As if. He paused for a moment, and then added in a satisfied tone. He's Dar of the Maharana clan. I crushed his skull and splattered his brains all over the ground once. Ah, that felt so satisfying. Rain sighed again. Single quote. Of course he did. The caravan moved on. After that first welcoming arrow, the Lord of Hell did not assist them anymore. So, the days of traveling to Red Hill were tough on the ascended merchant and his guards. The heat was oppressive, the hazards of the glass hell threatened to damage the wagons, and the elusive abominations of the hive attacked them incessantly, making one skirmish blend into another. Still, they made good progress. None of the guards lost their lives, even if one of the gargantuan echoes had to be dismissed in order to prevent its complete destruction. The speed of the caravan fell after that, but they still reached the city in one piece, just as the sun touched the western horizon. Rain studied Red Hill with interest, since this was her first time visiting it. It was a peculiar place. The citadel itself stood on a tall hill of glass. In fact, it was carved from the hill, resembling a tall, vertical fortress made up of different structures and narrowing to a sharp spire. Even if Rain knew that it was carved from glass, she could not help but think that she was looking at clear ice instead. A fiery sunset ignited the vertical fortress, making it glow with a spectacular scarlet glow. That was where the name of the citadel had come from, most likely. The city surrounding the citadel was built on the lower slopes of the hill and around its base. It was large, but not nearly in the same category as Bastion, housing no more than 1 million people. Curiously enough, the only building material readily available here was unnaturally clear glass, so the houses were mostly transparent. In fact, one could easily determine how wealthy a citizen was by how opaque their residence seemed. The rich people living on the slopes of the hill could afford to import materials and cover their houses, making them both private and less prone to turning into glass ovens. The poor folks could barely afford to board their bathrooms, though, and lived their entire lives in broad view of their neighbors. Rain felt that this nearly absolute lack of privacy was extremely bizarre, but the locals seemed to have grown used to it, going about their lives as if nothing was the matter. Humans were truly the most adaptable creatures. How would it feel like to live in a city almost entirely devoid of secrets? Maybe it was the influence of her brother. But Rain thought that it would feel absolutely horrible. She smiled. Now I see why these huge wagons are loaded to the brim with nothing but stone from the Moonriver Plains and lumber from Godgrave. Pill nodded. We'll sell it here, load up on glass, and then resell it at a profit further down the line. Hell glass is amazingly durable, crystal clear, and can even repair itself. It's dirt cheap here, but goes for a pretty penny in Bastion. Rain nodded. No wonder. The caravan rolled toward the city gate. The wall surrounding Red Hill was formidable, but just as transparent as everything else, so, Rain could easily see the lively streets beyond. Actually, they were a bit too lively. There was a peculiar energy suffusing the population of Red Hill, as if something impactful had happened. The caravan master noticed it, as well. As his echo reached the gates, he shouted to the awakened guarding it. What is going on? Is the hive swarming? The tunnels under the city were blocked off, but a massive enough attack could still breach the seals. The guard looked up, grinned, and shook his head. You've been on the road for a while, huh? Then you mustn't have heard. The ascended merchant frowned. Heard about what? The guard let out a laugh. A new sovereign emerged in Bastion. What was his name again? Astarion. Right, Astarion. These days, the whole world is talking about him. Behind Rain, the older guard smiled quietly. And at the same time, she felt an ominous feeling squeeze her heart. 2777 Hopeful benevolence. Wow. Rain was leaning on a glass wall, staring into the distance with an absent expression. She remained silent for a while, then let out a sigh and repeated herself. Wow. A second later, a frustrated voice resounded in her ear. What are you spacing out for, huh? Rain glanced side to side, then fanned herself with a hand. No, but did you see him? The Lord of Hell. Wow. Sunny let out a stifled curse. They were currently on the outer edges of Red Hill, just behind the city wall. Night had already fallen, and a silver moon was climbing the starlit sky. Countless lanterns ignited all across the glass city, their light glistening as it reflected from countless transparent walls. It was truly a gorgeous sight, but not the sight that had left Rain speechless. The enormous wagons stood in front of transparent warehouses at the moment, being unloaded of their cargo. The guards were preparing to go on leave, while the ascended merchant himself was at the head of the caravan, discussing something with the ruler of the city, Dar of the Maharana clan. The saint had descended from the height of the citadel personally to receive a shipment of building materials meant to reinforce the seals in the tunnels beneath the city. Rain had only glimpsed him from a distance, but was left impressed nonetheless. Her brother was full of indignation, though. What is there to see? Rain scoffed. What do you mean, what is there to see? His arms. Gods, they're like tree trunks. Rain was shocked when the enormous arrow vaporized the glass nightmare creature, but after seeing the archer, she could believe that it had traveled 1,000 kilometers across the sky. Saint Dar was imposingly tall, with shoulders so broad that they were like a mountain plateau. His skin was dark, while his luscious hair and thick beard were raven black. His face possessed a rugged kind of handsomeness to it, as if carved from stone by a sculptor, while his eyes were stern and fierce. His most striking feature, however, was his body. It seemed to have an entire geography to it, having been sculpted entirely out of flawlessly defined, adamantine muscle. Rain was pretty sure that each of his powerful arms was as thick as her waist. She clicked her tongue in admiration. It's insane. By then, her brother was already seething with outrage. Crazy. You know what's mad? That this wannabe has the gall to call himself the Lord of Hell. What precisely has he done to deserve that title? A pathetic copycat is what he is. Rain finally couldn't hold it in anymore and laughed. Well, he's the ruler of the glass hell. I doubt that he came up with that nickname himself. Saint Dar had been a soldier of the Song army during the war, but now ruled a citadel east of Godgrave. That went to show that there were no artificial divisions in the human domain anymore. In any case, Rain wasn't really that interested in the local ruler, even if he was truly an impressive specimen, but more so in teasing her brother while waiting for the caravan guards. Some of them had already gone to town to collect news, while the rest were planning to find a local tavern and relax after the long and deadly journey. Ronnie. Just then, Pil called out to her, signaling that they were ready to depart. Soon enough, Rain found herself in a cheap tavern, sampling local cuisine and cooling herself down with refreshingly cold ale. The fact that the floor of the tavern was transparent, revealing the web of tunnels stretching into the unfathomable darkness of the depths, was a little unnerving, but the food was delicious. To Ronnie, the guards were busy celebrating her contribution to their safe arrival at Red Hill. She smiled and raised her glass, giving them a little bow. That's me. If you're so grateful, the bill is on you. They laughed. Just then, the scouts they had sent into the city returned. The guards pushed tankards of ale toward the newcomers and then stared at them expectantly. The scouts quenched their thirst. It's true, one of them shook his head in bewilderment. There is indeed a new supreme by the name of Astarion. Well, I am not sure if we can call him new. In fact, he was a member of Broken Sword's cohort and among the first saints of humanity. He opened a dream gate in NQSC and came to Bastion a few days back. Lady Changing Star even lowered the Ivory Island to the surface of the lake to welcome him. Now, he apparently resides in an abandoned church on the outskirts of the city, the one near the city gates. Pil raised his eyebrow with a dubious expression on his face. So this imaginary sovereign is real, after all. Bah, so where was the bastard during the war? Hiding in the bushes. Or did he conquer the fourth nightmare just last week? He laughed and shook his head with a derisive expression. The other guard shrugged. That's the thing. According to rumors, he became supreme with Queen Song and the King of Swords, when they challenged the fourth nightmare during the Chain of Nightmares. But those two turned on him as soon as the nightmare was conquered and imprisoned him in a magical array. The array slowly deteriorated after their deaths, and he finally broke free. Pil still seemed suspicious. There was a disdainful expression on his face, at least. He remained silent for a while, then asked somberly, so what is that sovereign about, anyway? What does he want? Rain was getting the feeling that her former colleague was not fond of any sovereigns who were not nephews of the immortal Flame clan. And who could blame him? Supremes did not have a particularly good track record with humanity. Two had began a bloody civil war, while the third was a sinister recluse who supposedly liked to kidnap people. The Lord of Shadows, meanwhile, was believed to have turned on Changing Star in an attempt to usurp all the power for himself and died by her blade. Power truly corrupts. Rain focused on her meal. The scout, meanwhile, finished his ale and shrugged. He seems, all right, sane and reasonable, that is what people say. Apparently, he wants to help. He was like an uncle to Our Lady when she was a child, anyway. Pil scoffed. So was Anvil of Valor. His tone was dark. The lively atmosphere around the table suddenly turned somber. The guards remained silent for a long while, but eventually, one of them spoke in a hesitant tone. Still, what if he really is like they say? Just imagine what having another righteous supreme would mean for us. For all humans. The other guards did not answer, but Rain could see that their eyes ignited with hope and wistfulness. The guard who had brought the news even allowed himself a hopeful smile. We'll know for sure in a day or two. Lady Changing Star is set to make an announcement. The conversation turned away from the new supreme after that. The wagons had to be repaired, and the damaged Echo needed time to restore itself, so the caravan ended up lingering in Red Hill for an additional day. Rain used that time to explore the city and take in its many peculiarities. Eventually, however, it was time for the caravan to leave, and for her to enter the citadel and use its gateway to travel to NQSC. From there, she would walk through the Dream Gate with the latest group of settlers and return to Bastion. Before departing, Rain found Pil to say goodbye. He seemed regretful. It was nice to see you again, Ronnie. It's a shame that you have to go. Where are you headed, anyway? She shrugged. I'm returning to Bastion. I have some work lined up there. Rain hesitated for a moment, then smiled and slapped the older man on the shoulder. That's where that imaginary sovereign resides now, as well. Who knows? I might even see the bastard with my own 2 eyes. She was joking, naturally. She was planning to stay as far away from the man called Astarion as possible, and her brother seemed hell-bent on preventing the two of them from meeting at all costs. Rain expected Pil to chuckle, or at least smile. However, his reaction was a little strange. Instead of giving the caravan's running joke a light-hearted send-off, he regarded Rain with an unamused scowl. In fact, his expression was downright disapproving. She raised an eyebrow. What's wrong? Pil studied her silently for a few seconds, then sighed and glanced away. His voice sounded even. I am saying this as a friend, Ronnie, but you might want to watch your tone. That is no way to speak about a supreme. Especially not about Lord Astarion. With that, he patted her on the shoulder and walked away. Rain remained standing motionlessly, deeply disturbed. A cold shiver ran down her spine. What the hell just happened? She stared at Pil's back for a while, then frowned and turned toward the distant citadel.